Hello everyone, I'm Taaka Awori, founder and CEO of Busara Africa, a Pan-African leadership development firm. Welcome to the Leadership in Africa Redefined podcast. This podcast seeks to do two things. One, change the narrative of leadership in Africa, and two, provide concrete strategies and tips for leading in an African context. We do this by interviewing amazing African leaders so that the narrative of leadership in Africa is defined by the best of us, not the worst of us. We share their stories and provide practical suggestions for dealing with the challenges of leading on this continent. We discuss, interrogate, and examine concrete leadership practices that work. We also look at failures that these leaders faced and how they navigated their ways back on track. It's an exciting and empowering space for leaders to thrive and engage. Subscribe to the show to become the leader you have always wanted to be. And if you like the show, be sure you rate it and review it. It helps others to find it. Thanks so much.
So welcome to another episode of Leadership in Africa Redefined. Today, I'm really excited to have as my guest on this episode, Françoise Moudouthe, who is the CEO of the African Women's Development Fund. Françoise, welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me, Taaka.
Yeah, really nice to see you. So, folks, Françoise is a Pan-African feminist with roots in Cameroon. She's absolutely committed to African feminist African feminist movements. Look at me, I'm already blurbing my words as we start this conversation. Prior to being the CEO of AWDF, she founded and ran Ayala, a bilingual English-French platform that amplifies the voices and lived experiences of African feminists, and worked as an international consultant for gender justice in Africa. And last year, Françoise, you didn't tell me this because I would have congratulated you on this. Last year, Avance Media named Françoise as the fourth of among the 100 most influential African women in 2022. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And given everything that he's done and the work that you do, I'm not surprised about that.
Thank you. Thank you. I usually find those kind of 40-something, 50-something, those lists.
Yes.
I always find them a bit odd. So that's why I don't talk about them. I always find them a little odd. So I don't really brag about them. It's not the flex. I think I'm not flexing the way I should, but
Exactly. And so maybe let me give you a chance to flex. Françoise, tell us about your leadership journey, some of the things that have got you to where you are today, and give us a sense of what the leadership milestones to where you are as the CEO of AWDF today.
Yes. So thank you, and thanks again for having me. As you know, I'm a big fan of your book, which I have here, and I think that it's interesting. Every time I think of myself and my journey, I don't think about it as a journey of leadership.
Okay.
I think of my journey as a journey of service. And I think that I think it's only when I joined AWDF that I found myself in a formal position of leadership that was undeniable for me because I'm very good at just doing my work, and the position of leadership has come quite late. But I do think that the movement leadership might have come a bit earlier, but I'd never quite saw it as such because I was just doing the work. And for me, that work is a work of service. I'm really committed to feminist transformation of society, towards a society, especially on the African continent, that is anchored in an understanding of power and patriarchy and the other structures of power and how they affect our lives. And I'm just deeply committed to freedom. This is my goal. My service. I'm all about freedom and freedom from those structures of powers. And so for me, it's really has been a journey, not of leadership necessarily, the way I think about it, but of commitment to pushing towards liberation, especially for African girls, African women, and gender non-conforming people. So my career has, in the past maybe 10 years or so, maybe a bit more now, has been very dedicated to making sure I was able to contribute my best abilities towards that. And I've had some formal positions that people will call of leadership, but every time it was about coordinating others, supporting others. And it's been either through advocacy, coordination support when I was working at Girls Not Brides, which is the Global Partnership to End Child Marriage, or creating space for people to have conversations, for feminists, African feminists to have conversations about who they are, not just what they do, which is what I did with Ayala. And in a way, working at AWDF is a great opportunity for me to support feminist movements at a different scale and in a different way, with financial support specifically. So I think for me, my different ways I've tried to do it, it's been different path, but the same objective, which is really that I think feminist transformation is possible, that feminist movements are best placed to do it, but they need nurturing in many ways. So how do we nurture them? Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's space, sometimes it's love. Yeah, but that's been.
Oh,
that's
I love that. I love that. I love that. And before I move on to my next question, which is going to pick up on your passion and commitment to feminist transformation and supporting feminist movements, I want to come back to something really powerful you said. You said it hasn't been so much a journey of leadership, but a journey of service. And as you know, I'm glad you love the book, because I think you have seen that that's something that I say so strongly in the book, that not often, the kind of leadership we need on this continent, or the kinds of leaders we need, are people who first and foremost are moving towards purpose. And I'm hearing that you've been driven by purpose, but often that purpose is about service. And then the titles can come. But even when I hear how you've offered the leadership, and I'm really picking up on some of the words you used, you talked about it in terms of coordination, supporting others, creating space. And I think too often we think about leadership in terms of being at the top, delegating, commanding, telling people what to do, directing. But what I'm hearing from you is that foundation of service, whether or not you have a title. So thank you for reminding us that it's not always about that title. Right?
Yes, a friend of mine called me a reluctant leader, and I think that's how
a reluctant positional leader. But I think you've offered leadership in the other different ways, which to me, by the way, and this comes to my next question, I think these are more feminist ways of doing it. I think to me, the very patriarchal way of leading, where you're at the top, but it's one way, is a very limited way of thinking about leadership. So, which brings me to my next question. We hear a lot, particularly within the civil society space, about the importance and the growing demand and need for feminist leadership. How would you define that? How would you give flesh to what that means very practically? And how would you distinguish it from what somebody might just say, well, that's just good leadership. That's just effective, transformative leadership.
Yeah, I think that for me, there's a difference in the who, the what, I would say the what for, and the how. Obviously, feminist leadership is more often done by feminists, often by women, girls, gender non-conforming people. But I find so fascinating the many conversations I've had with women I think are doing absolutely incredible feminist leadership, and they're like, please don't mix me up with this, your feminism, you know. So I think there's also the who can the who can be a little bit a little less clear than we would have wanted. But I think for me that the main two differences are in the what are we leading towards? What is the purpose of our leadership? A lot of good leadership that we hear about is we lead people to deliver results, and what defines good results is often, especially in capitalistic, very capitalism-centered organizations or businesses, it's about, you know, making money, right? So my partner also is leading an organization, and we have conversation that is like, you're too, you know, concerned with people's feelings. Just don't you have results, right? So I think there's something about what is the purpose. I think the feminist leadership the what for of it should be aligned with the what for of our feminist action, which is transforming society. And very often we find that I think, this is me now, I shouldn't say me, I think that feminist leadership should mirror within the community that we lead, be it an organization, a movement, etc., should mirror the things that we want to see in the world. And for me, that's a very different way of looking at how we work with others. And that leads me to the how. I think there's something about feminist leadership that first recognizes discriminations even within our spaces. Recognizes the dynamics of power even within our spaces, and that intentionally try to prevent, address, just being very aware that if we have a team where we say we are a bilingual organization, for example, and say English, French, and then we say we want to hire people who speak French, who are we hiring? Are we hiring people who are English speaking but have learned some French? Or are we organizing ourselves to make space for Francophones who might not be so great at English but can do the work in a better way? These are the small, it's just an example, there are so many of them. What kind of policies do we have? You know, we've had discussions about our policies, feminists, you know, and what makes a good policy, the way we do our programming. Just being aware of dynamics of power and not replicating them, and even in many ways in our own small ecosystem, being able to do better than society does, but definitely not do worse. And being aware of that, be intentional about that, I think for me is one of the main differences in the how.
Hi folks, hope you're enjoying the show. So have you heard about the Africa Leaders Circle? Our impactful e-learning platform that enables you to grow into the leader you would want to follow? Here is a message to tell you what you need to know.
Are you a CEO, executive director, or HR manager that is looking to build a pipeline of leaders that are ready to step up into management roles? Are you looking for a self-paced learning platform that provides your leaders with quality content and does not take them away from their work for too long? Are you looking for a program that enables your managers to move from knowledge acquisition to demonstrable improved practice? Then look no further. Sign them up for the African Leaders Circle today. The African Leaders Circle is an e-learning platform that gives your managers access to an exclusive community of leaders across the continent and a wide range of strategies and tools to stand out. We do this through online courses, discussion forums, a library of resources, and a personal learning advisor to support each of your managers to maximize their learning on the platform. To learn more, visit our website www.busara-africa.com.
Don't forget to visit our website busara-africa.com to learn more. And now back to the show.
I love what you're saying, because what I'm hearing you say clearly, so it's both the what and the differentiation in terms of the what. And what I've often seen is folks who are leading people just to achieve, it's like more money, whatever results, however you define them, without necessarily transformation in the societies in which they're living. But I've also seen businesses, so even businesses who are there ostensibly to make profit, do it differently, where they're saying, yes, we need to make money, but we're also seeking to make an impact. So that's the what. The how, what I'm hearing is paying particular attention to being the change internally that you want to see out there. And I'm glad you're saying that, because I see too often, there have been times I've been disappointed in our civil society space where we often are not mirroring, or in many respects, the inequities we see in the world, we see internally. And usually the problem starts right up top. What would you say make it particularly difficult for many civil society leaders to lead in a way that they become the change that they want to see out there, or they influence their organizations to be the change that they want to see out there?
Yeah. I think there's, for me, two obstacles come to mind. The first one is that we don't live in an environment that is remote from the main society. So everything that happens in society happens in our ranks. And the earlier we own it, acknowledge it, instead of trying to hide it, the better. So when we hire people, we should know that if society is generally homophobic, we have homophobic people in our ranks. We must know it, right? And we must deal with it, instead of being like, oh, no, we see society. No, it's just not happening. It's the same for everything, So I think for me is sometimes a bit of wishful thinking that that puts like a rosy lens on the way we look at ourselves. For me, it's one thing. And the other thing about society is extremely ego-driven. Especially now with social media. So for me, one of the reasons I struggle with being called a leader was that, there's, especially from feminist leadership, in feminist movements, there's not one leader. There's no superhero syndrome in feminist movements. Yet the society is structured to value an individual's heroic path or journey. So when I was working on Ayala was always about the voices. Actually, Ayala actually means that which is spoken in Douala. And it was so interesting because it was never about my voice, but I was always told, one, how are you going to monetize your blog? And I was like, I don't want to, but there's no training for bloggers who are not trying to monetize. Secondly, people were saying, if you want to sell Ayala, you need to tell your own journey. That's what people care about. And so I think this society is structured in ways that just are in a different direction. And if you want to succeed, results, visibility, money, there's a bit of a tension there. And all of us leading in that space are in a very tight, balanced space. And we are bound to sometimes just sway on the wrong side of this, whatever right or wrong sides are there. So for me, there's something about how society is structured and how we are trying to live in an oasis, but actually we are not. We are living right within society, and we cannot quite, wish the things to be different because they are not. And very quickly, the second challenge is, I think that nobody really knows the perfect. There's no blueprint for feminist leadership. Everybody's just making it up, trying to figure it out. There's no blueprint the way you have leadership books. Very few of them are focused on a context like yours. Very few of them are having a feminist lens. And because of the kind of society we live in, we don't practice documenting and sharing our mistakes. So we keep making the same mistakes, organization after organization, because we don't have the space to say, well, this one, I really messed this up. But if I want to maintain my leadership persona, I can't say it. So there's always these tensions, I think, that also make it difficult for us to actually learn. You know, if you're going to read books about leadership, they're very often written by white American men.
Yes.
And you gave us a beautiful gift, exactly, in corporate context. So you gave us a really rare gift, but there are very few of them. And even when I remember when I told you I read the book and I told you, now where's the space to discuss it? Because we must have the spaces where we are able to say, listen, I was really struggling with this, without fear of diminishing our leadership persona, which is what we need to get our next job and feed our children. So it's a bit difficult, I think, but yeah, we try. Everybody's trying.
Powerful. And you know what I love that you're bringing up, even as you discuss the two challenges, you're almost giving flesh to what feminist leadership really looks like in practice. So for instance, just by when you talked about how we mirror society that focuses on this one almighty individual, and yet, as you said, feminist leadership is a lot more collective. Yes. It's a lot more distributed. It's not just about the one. It's something we've always understood as women, and we tap in to the power of the one. And increasingly, actually, when we start to look at the shifts in the types of leadership that are being considered effective for the kinds of times that we live in, the uncertain times, the times of rapid change, they're finding that collective and distributed leadership styles and ways of working and cultures are much more advantageous. Yeah. Because it cannot be that one person can always have all the ideas and solutions to manage what's constantly coming at us in this day and time. So I think organizations and companies are increasingly seeing this value of this new form of leadership. The other aspect of leadership that you mentioned that is also becoming recognized as being particularly effective, but is so emblematic of feminist leadership, is the ability to show vulnerability. Because you're so grounded and secure, you're able to say, I made a mistake, I messed up, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And that comes from a sense of confidence and deep self-awareness. And I think often we learn that way. But too often in that old style patriarchal leadership, it's a style of, I have all the answers and I don't make mistakes. And if not, if I do, I don't show them. Yeah. So I think that's...
I think you said ability, Taaka. I think it's courage. And I think for me, feminist leadership really comes down to courage. Courage to challenge structural structural issues within, for me, feminist leadership is very much about courage. To talk about the deeper, we're not just talking about equality, or gender equality. We're talking about liberation. So that's one form of courage. One form of courage is about vulnerability, as you just noted. One form of courage is about, I think, saying no. This is the hardest thing. But feminist leaders, in my feminist leadership, I've had to say no more often than I've had to say yes.
No to what? What have you been saying no?
A lot of times I've had to say no to opportunities that were, let me just say it this way, opportunities that would provide better benefits. It could be a job with more money. It could be an opportunity to speak on a panel with somebody who's ultra-capitalistic, very problematic, but it's going to give me visibility. But I've also had to say no to myself quite a bit because I'm quite the workaholic, I have to confess. And I think I've had to, for me, feminist leadership also has always an eye on sustainability. And this is a lesson I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to have the courage to say no to myself for the sake to slow, you know. So one of the things we did a couple of years ago in my first year at AWDF, and the team was so tired. And we said, let's just close 1 week in August. Let's just close the office for a week. What's going to happen? We just close the office, you know, and everybody came back so refreshed. It's become a tradition, you know, but at that time, it's like, oh, everything is so crazy and can't stop. And I'm like, none of us are surgeons. Nobody dies.
Yeah.
You know, that's why we work in a movement. Like, if we rest, others keep going. So I think there's a lot of... I was reading from your book, and allow me to quote very quickly, because I was going through my notes, you know, it's all written. And I made a note, and I wrote, yup. And this is what I said.
Okay.
I wrote, leadership from a space of worthiness gives birth to effective self-care. Many leaders I know are exhausted. They are running on an empty tank. The pressure to deliver results, take care of the people they are responsible for, and to keep their business and organizations afloat takes a toll. And I said, yup, because all of us, everybody's tired. I don't know a single feminist leader who is not exhausted.
Yes.
Myself included.
Yes.
All the time.
Myself included.
So I think there's courage in taking care of ourselves in a way that doesn't feel like we're indulging. That care, I mean, we always say self-care is political, and we say it to others, but not to ourselves. But we don't say to ourselves that we can't lead if we are sick, if we are tired, if we are completely incapable of making any decisions, etc. And that takes courage in the society we live in, where taking care of ourselves is seen as weakness or of laziness or something like that. For me, anyway. I don't know about
it's not just for you. I say to many friends, there is a syndrome. I call it the strong African woman syndrome. That many of us have been raised that we do not have the luxury of being tired, of being depressed, we're like, no, save that for, those others. But we've been raised and socialized with this mindset. So herein lies your courage, the courage to say, I'm going to unlearn some of those mindsets and beliefs that I realize I may have worked for my mother, but are not working for me. My mother worked hard to give me certain things that I should be able to rest at all times because certain basics are covered. So you're so right. I see courage so much intertwined. Challenge, the courage to challenge status quos, the courage to say no, as you said, the courage to redefine what does success actually look like? Because that's what I'm hearing you say. And what does effective leadership actually look like? That takes courage because you are going, and again, as you said, we don't live in islands. We live in society that's constantly, and for many of us as Africans, societies that are not looking at what you're doing quietly. They're looking on and fully commenting all the time. You're not doing this. People feel very free to tell you about what you should or should not be doing.
Absolutely.
But also this element of, I always want to come back to the worthiness, and I thank you for reading out that particular quote. I think too often when I see the traditional type of leaders, not traditional, old school leadership books, as you talked about, written with that old style, often this core, because I always say leadership comes from that deep, when you love yourself, then you're able to love others. Right? And leadership, I always say, is a dance of love quite often. So we talked about the challenges. Maybe a final question I will ask you is around, what are the things, you talk about saying no and but what are the 2 to 3 things you do on a regular basis that enable you to exercise the feminist leadership we just talked about?
A lot of them I do, and a lot of them I don't do enough of. But I think the thing that has really helped me throughout is listening. For me, that is the first element of any leadership, but particularly feminist leadership, is listening with empathy. not listening to resolve or listening to decide or anything like that, but really listening to connect. And for me, it just so happens that it is part of my personality that I listen more than I talk, and I understand through listening, not through reading. So for me, listening is actually very core. At AWDF, I was so, I think, fortunate that I was able to have 6 weeks, almost 2 months of handover with my predecessor, Theo, which allowed me to listen while she was still working. And I did like a very extensive listening tour with the board, with the team, partners. And by the time I was officially in charge, I was asked, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do what you told me needs to be done. And it helps me, but it also helps people I work with see themselves in the vision. Because I don't have a vision. I mean, AWDF has been around for 20-something years. Who am I to have a vision that comes from, that I've plucked from a tree? But vision comes from listening. Even before, the work I did with Ayala was really about listening. So listening is very key. So that's one thing. I think something that I should do more, I think, is to take care of myself, take time. And that it's, on the one hand, is about my physical and mental well-being. And there's a few things that I'm able to do, and I'm very glad I can do it, but there's just so much more. And that includes, for me, it includes also coaching, a therapist, but eating well, etc. Those basic things are the ones I don't do well, because I'm always so consumed by the pace of things. Yes. And then I think maybe the thing I would like to end on, is make time and space to nurture my thoughts. So reading, listening to podcasts, having conversations with movement leaders and just people out there, because I think there's a lot. I've never had to, I always call it running my mouth. I speak so much on panels. I'm like, what am I speaking about if I don't have time to read, to listen? What am I talking about? And I think that's something I would love to do more of, and just make sure I'm intentional and systematic about making space for those things. Because otherwise, I'll be here in 5 years saying the same things that I was saying in year one. Because making the time to nurture my thoughts, I think is so necessary. It's one of my priorities for this year, and that all goes back to the courage to say no, because it's a race out there. Yes, it's a hamster wheel out there. There's no space to stop.
Yeah. It won't just be granted to you unless you clear out and say no. Exactly. Protect the space.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's so amazing. I love these three because I can see how much they tied to how we've described and talked about feminist leadership. And when you talk about listening with empathy to connect, and even when you talked about how you developed that, how you co-created that vision for AWDF, and the way you said, what I'm doing is what I heard you say you want to be done. Huh? To me, that speaks to the collective leadership. Yeah. And to me, it gives a very concrete example for someone listening to say, well, how do I do this collective leadership? And I'll say one of the key skill sets is really listening. And you said listening not to decide, and there's time for that. But it's a whole skill set, listening with empathy and to connect. So I really see that connection. The taking time, definitely. We've connected that with key part of feminist leadership is taking care of self so that you're leading from a full tank. And definitely you connected this last one, which I'm hearing. It's all the nurturing and the time for reflection is that growth, which we haven't talked about, but to me is a key part of feminist leadership that keeps it alive. How do you stay relevant, responsive, as a leader, you're plugged in, tuned in to those that you're serving, so that as you run your mouth, you're doing it from an informed perspective, a connected perspective of the constituency you're seeking to serve. Oh, of course, yes, I could talk to you forever. Okay, my last point. Yeah, go ahead, please.
This very last point. I wanted to add some bonus thing that I think really helps me is community. I think leadership of any kind is extremely isolating. It's the most isolating experience I've ever had. And it's because of there's some needs around confidentiality, there's some needs about appearance of fairness, there's so many, and there's all the ego-driven things that I was telling you about earlier. Community, and from a feminist perspective, feminist sisterhood and siblinghood is core. There's no survival, not even thriving, but there's no surviving out of it. So I think finding community of people who you can share with, you can support, and also people who can check you.
Yes.
I think
tell you the truth when you're messing up. Yes.
I think that's very, very important. And I'm glad to say this is one of the few things that I do well, and I want to continue doing. I think it's absolutely essential. There's no way around it.
No, so you can't. I myself couldn't agree. My sisters feed me, keep me straight. And I always tell folks, you don't need 10, because these are high quality relationships. You don't need 10, you don't need 50. You just need your quality 2, 3, however many, to get that quality of sister, sibling that can really nurture you. But as you also said, they're the ones who call you out, because often that's the other thing in leadership, right? Nobody gives you direct feedback. Yeah, this is what these folks do for you. They tell you straight when you need to be told straight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was a good bonus. I'm glad you added that. Oh, Françoise, merci, ma sœur. This was just truly, truly amazing. I could have gone on and on and on and on. I'm sure we'll have you back on to be continued.
But I'm looking forward to that.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you too, folks. Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of Leadership in Africa Redefined, the podcast. See you next time. Ciao.
Hello, wonderful leader. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the podcast. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. If you want more of the lessons, experiences, and nuggets for effective leadership, join our amazing platform for leaders, the African Leaders Circle. Learn more at www.busara-africa.com. And if you liked the show, don't forget to subscribe and share with other amazing leaders. See you soon. Ciao.